Oh, here's my conflicts. I was going to base my talk around the evidence, so it would be a very quick talk. So I'll talk as much as there is, but really interesting to me is just how this industry is booming, and it really is to do with the fact that the FDA only requires a safety measure as well as minimal manipulation of human tissue. So we're seeing this growing to a multi-billion-dollar industry in 2019 and projected to go even further. There's a gap created by the controversy of BMP that was filled very quickly. Really, if we're breaking it down quite simply, there's autograft BMP and everything else. Sig's gone over a lot of this, so I'll try to blast through this, but I'm going to talk more about DBMs, a little bit about BMP, and some of the cellular-based DBMs. So history of bone grafting in the 1700s when this autograft was first described, and then you see the exponential increase, and that really has to do with, and it really is the Wild West, there really isn't any regulation because of that, the ability to drive the FDA, through the FDA, their products. So this is an interesting review by Wellington Sue. It's a little scary just looking at everything we use and the limited number of studies there are. If you compare that to everything else we use, it's quite fascinating. So going over some of the important factors in bone healing, in particular osteogenesis is new bone formation from cells, osteoconduction, osteoinduction we've talked about, and Sig went over the graft extenders. Really an ideal bone graft substitute will mimic properties of an autogenous graft, both osteoinductive and osteoconductive. So osteoconductive and most of the synthetics of ceramics are really a scaffold to facilitate cellular adhesion, ingrowth, and bone formation. Calcium, osteoblasts attach and can be resorbed by osteoclasts. Collagen is really the most good for conductive of mineral deposition, vascular ingrowth, et cetera. Some of the osteoinductive, DBM and BMPs. So DBM, demineralized bone matrix, it's acid-treated cortical bone, really removes the mineralized portion. We're left with about 93% collagen and 5% the BMPs. It's really an acid decalcification that really can, in the cleaning process, really destroys and limits the amounts of BMPs and their abilities. And certainly the concentrations we're not quite sure. It is less allergenic. It is an extender enhancer or a substitute, but not a very good graft. It does have osteoinductive potential, which is why we use it. This is just to show how many are out there. It's mind-boggling, and the number of high-level studies is significantly limited, so I'll go over them in a second. So content, this was a little disturbing. So difference of BMP contact between products and even within a single product between lots. What does that have to do with? Storage, the demineralization process, the washing, sterilization, and the carrier sometimes can affect the BMP ability as well as can be actually toxic to the surrounding tissues. Yambay published a study looking at the BMP contact among the same DBM among different lots and showed various different concentrations. So it depends on the age of the donor. It depends on all these factors, but the fact there was so much variability is a concern. So going over some of these cervical data, level 2 study, still graft-on versus autograft. It was a non-inferiority study. It showed a higher non-union rate, interestingly, when combined with allograft. So that was one of the main take-home points out of that study. Just showing again, that's the best we got there. A lot of level 3 and 4 data. This is a level 1 study by Bowden, prospective, randomized, controlled, looking at graft-on versus local bone. Graft-on and local bone versus autologous. And showed similar fusion rates. DBMs supposedly had a higher functional abilities at 2 years, but greater morbidity with the iliac crest bone group. Another level 2 study was interesting, looking at 120 patients, comparing iliac crest bone graft on one side in the posterior lateral gutter versus graft on the other side. Showed a relatively similar fusion rate to autograft alone. Again, level 3 and 4 data, that's really all we've got for the DBMs. So I use Physios isn't really a pure DBM. It's a proprietary process, mix of processed cortical tissue, allograft-blooded, mineralized cancellous particulate. There's no carrier as opposed to the DBMs. Some of the factors this is actually an in vitro study looking at the alkaline phosphatase activity at 6 and 13 days and shows an actual increase above infuse at 13 days. So it's promising, but still to be determined. So the synthetics, we can go over it. It would take me a whole talk, but the data is just really not there. This is an interesting talk by, a paper by Jeff Wong, a review looking at synthetics. Again, a low regulatory barrier. There's just a ton of products available, 27 studies looked at, and bias was significantly high, no level 1 studies. So it's really hard to take the synthetics too seriously by themselves. So I think they work best in combination. This is a HA study showing some positive results looking at posterior lateral fusions in the lumbar spine. So BMP, I won't go over too much. The TGF-beta, a family of growth factors, can actually, in high concentrations, result in direct intramembranous ossification, has a lot of chemotaxis abilities, apoptosis, cellular regulation, recombinant technology, so it's really mass produces BMPs. There's over 10 BMPs. We've really focused on BMP 2 and 7. BMP 2 approved by the FDA in 2002 for a single level ALF, as we know. Subsequently in 2008 for revision for pseudoarthrosis of the posterior lumbar and for open tibia fractures. And OP1's really for investigational use only. So in 2002, when it was approved, just very minimal amount of fusions. 2006, a pretty exponential growth. By 2007, only 16% of those were an ALF, the rest was off-label. Black box came, as you know, in 2008, and the significant swelling. This is really scary to me. I know we've talked about it. Some people still use BMP in low concentration. It is probably a concentration phenomenon and packing phenomenon, but I think it's way too dangerous. This is Carraghe's review article highlighting the potential conflicts, financial conflicts, and publication bias of potential underreporting of complications. So safety concerns were brought up, exuberant bone formation, osteolysis, certainly the cervical problem and the potential for cancer. So that resulted in the YODA's studies, 2 independent groups looking at the initial BMP2 trials, and resulted in 2 meta-analysis papers, essentially showing a bottom line, reasonably safe per the FDA indications, as effective as iliac crest bone graft, and certainly unsafe when used off-label, particularly for TLIFs and cervical surgery. So just quickly, just because of that controversy, really about the same time, really filling the space left surrounding this controversy. Multiple sponsored trials are on the way. It really is, as Sig talked about, the stem cells. It's essentially the cortical bone and the cancellous bone processed from a donor, and the cells are washed and immunodepleted, and the cortical bone used for a DBM. So really is processed by a tissue bank and licensed by a spine company, really the fastest growing market in bone graft. But it's been on the market for 13 years. Really, most studies have occurred in osteocell and Trinity, and really limited data, and the conclusions are weak. So it's really hard to justify paying a premium, which is usually at our facility just under a cost of what a BMP would be. So the studies are ongoing, and we will see. Thank you. Questions?